Hi everyone, this is Cody Smith. Welcome to my channel, Cody Smith, Peer Support with Christ. Today I'm going to talk about chapter 3 of my book, which is the history of disability advocacy. And to be honest, the history of disability advocacy does not begin in 1990 with the signing of the ADA. It starts way before that, because there is a long history going back to the nomadic periods, time of the Greco-Roman period, where most people believed that people with disabilities were cursed and therefore they were often killed or abandoned. And it wasn't until the fall of Rome and rise of Christianity that people with disabilities were taken care of and given medical care. And even after that, as time went on and people began to get into the like occult and superstitious things, they began to, in the Middle Ages, they began to think that people with disabilities again were cursed, so they would want to hide them away, put them in basically prison just for being disabled because mainstream society did not have the medical knowledge that we do today and did not know how to treat people with disabilities medically or otherwise. And also, in this chapter, I've gone through some of the stereotypes, and a lot of this comes from um, sources such as stereotypes related to CP from Cerebral Palsy Guidance and the Adirondack Center for Independent Living. And that's where I get a lot of this information. And it was, as time went on, there was on and off again, you know, help for people with disabilities and, you know, shunning of people with disabilities. And there's been so many different stereotypes of, people with disabilities like people with CP. We all need wheelchairs. We all need, we're all low IQ. We all learn slowly, different things like that. And that's not always true. It may be that, we just learn our own way and maybe we physically do things a little bit slower, but that doesn't mean that we ourselves are slower or we're, defined by our disability or anything like that. It just means that, this circumstance makes us have to change the way we do things, as I've said before. And, personally, I'm giving you this historical information in the third chapter so you can see what we've been through over the years. Maybe not myself personally, but what the community as a whole has been through so that you can really see the truth. And unfortunately, this is what has led to a lot of the stereotypes in the modern era because there's always been stereotypes and maybe they've changed somewhat over the years, but they do have the same basic underlying principle. And the thing is, depending on who you ask, that's not always true because, again, it's not a one size fits all, as I've said before. And ultimately, I just want society to know that and know that if you give us the chance to do things our way, figure out what works best for each of us, then we will be able to do things ourselves, be independent, and also help society. And I just want to show you, what we've had to go through in order to get the independence that we have today, and we're still fighting for it because we don't have complete independence like we want, and we're still viewed as, less valuable in society by at least some people, maybe not everybody, but some people still do view us that way. And, I just want everyone to know that depending on who you ask, and depending on how the disability affects the person and and the level of severity and different things like that, they may have different problems in their day-to-day life, which we all do, disabled or not. So there's really no difference, and that is what I'm trying to get at. Ultimately, we're all the same. We all face some sort of limitation or problem that is holding us back from being able to do the things that we want to do the way we want to do them or the way in which they're typically done. And we have to factor that into the way we decide to go about doing what we want to do when we, choose our own methods and make our own free will decisions. And that's why I want you to know so much about this. And of course, there's also, as you get into like the 17, 18, and 1900s, during wars such as the Revolution, the Civil War, and so on. For example, people with disabilities who were, amputees or whatever had, limited options for jobs, and for many centuries, people with disabilities were given minimal jobs with less than minimum wage pay, pay we couldn't live off of, and we were often ostracized and put into quote unquote special schools where we were isolated from the rest of society and barely educated, not to the level of mainstream society, but given like just a basic education where maybe we could learn a trade that we could do that may earn us a tiny bit of money, but not near enough to live off of. And, of course, in the 1900s, during like the World War II era, it was, people like Hitler and his whole master race theory. He would find people with disabilities, he would kill us, he would try to keep us from, reproducing because he would be afraid that, we would produce other people with disabilities and things like that. So that is why I'm bringing this up. And even until the early 2000s, people with disabilities face things like hate crimes, and also it wasn't until the early 2000s, after the ADA was signed into law, that organizations were required to accommodate us. And, the first, I believe it was in 2004, the first um, disability awareness, disability pride festival was celebrated and things like that. So, we've come a long way over the years, but unfortunately, we still have a long way to go because organizations that help us, like vocational rehabilitation, that's available to help us with getting jobs and employment, didn't exist until the 1950s. So that is a huge problem. This is only in recent history, in less than a century, that we've really began to get the assistance, accommodations, and care, as well as, you know, the things that we need to survive: jobs, money, homes, and things like that. And we're still fighting for these things because we don't have them to the fullest extent that people without disabilities have. So that's why we're still advocating, and that's the whole point of this chapter. Because I'm trying to tell people the truth, and that's why we advocate, is to tell people the truth, tell people what's really going on, so that society will understand and be more willing to help us gain our independence. Which, if society would, then if we had our independence, we were able to work just as much as everybody else, maybe just in a different way, based on, you know, the methods that work best for us, then we could actually work hard, pay taxes, contribute to society. Maybe not dollar for dollar equal, as I say in the book, but at least it would be, our fair share, and we could help shoulder the financial burden and contribute to society just like everyone else. And that's what I want for us. And that's what I'm asking everyone to consider. Because we are people, you are people, and we all have a story to share. So if we would share our stories, maybe it would be that one of us might have the solution to someone else's problem that's holding them back. And then if we do and we could help each other out, then we could help each other to contribute to society. And even if it's not dollar for dollar equal, it would still be fair. And that's why I ask that people please read my book as well as try to communicate with others, both with disabilities and without disabilities, to learn about each other as much as you can so that you can see each other as equal human beings and then learn each other's story and see what becomes of it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Bye, everyone.